time is now 7 o'clock on the dot, which I'm absolutely delighted by, of the 5th of May 2025. Welcome to our post-match analysis for this year's local elections. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Ben Walker, co-founder of the Britain Elects, data journalist for the New Statesman, and full disclosure, I am a councillor in the city of Chester for the Labour Party, but that does not get in the way of how, I think at least, I look at the polls and public opinion and politics. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We are playing Sim City music because I think that's quite apt. And I'm able to read some of the comments, though not all, because there's an issue on my end, but never mind. Anyway, yes, 677 new reform councillors. And if anyone can remember the forecast I made for the New Statesman, that is an overperformance of how many? Almost double. Almost double. An overperformance for reform of more than double. Performing as well as the Britain Predicts model said for Runcorn and Helsby, although the Britain Predicts model said a Labour hold by a few hundred votes. What happened was a reform gain by 6 votes. Yeah, quite a lot. What I want to do today is to go through some of the results on the ground, talk about what may have happened, what probably hasn't happened, dispel some theories that are probably making their way through the Sunday papers, or did make their way through the Sunday papers, what these results mean and what they don't mean. Because the way we will respond to local elections, low turnout elections of 3 in 10 Britons trooping out to the polling station, can sometimes be a little bit over the top. But what happened on Thursday the 1st of May was dramatic. What happened on Thursday the 1st of May does feel like a sea change. What happened on Thursday the 1st of May is something I don't think we have experienced in quite some time. People will compare it, of course, to the SDP Liberal Alliance doing very well in the local elections in the run-up to 1983. But I think the difference is here is these guys are coming from nowhere, and it's not low turnout collapses, it's turnout staying. Turnout is staying where it was in elections gone by. There's always an argument made, isn't there, that it is down to normal voters staying at home and angry voters coming out. Well, hold on a minute. The last time these elections were up was 2021, and turnout was okay then. It was par for the course then. In Hartlepool, it was a pretty impressive turnout for that by-election, the one which made Keir Starmer reconsider his leadership of the Labour Party. And turnout in those parts of the world has pretty much stayed where it is. It hasn't dropped. Actually, in some places, it's even gone up, but it hasn't dropped. That's something we need to bear in mind there. Okay. Yes, and just as someone is saying right next to me here, there you go. Tony Blair's Sedgefield was Reform UK gain. One of a few of the wards in Sedgefield, anyway. Yes. So, and already one Reform councillor has since been suspended from the party and since left the party, but that's by the by. Although that does remind me of the UKIP days. But anyway, what I want to do is go through what happened, what it means and what it doesn't mean. So, I think we shall take you to the results. First of all, let's deal with the main result of the show. Runcorn and Helsby here in County Cheshire. Runcorn, Frodsham. It should be called Runcorn and Frodsham, but you know, it's not. Sometimes the naming of constituencies doesn't make sense. And look at that, Reform gained from Labour by a margin of, what is that? 6 votes. 6 votes. Yeah. And I just want to take us to the Britain Predicts forecast of what we said. And I would say it was close enough. Let's just look at those numbers. Overall, what Britain Predicts said, with a few days to go to polling day, was Labour should eke out a 300 vote margin over Reform, which equated to 36% to 35%. The Tories should fall from 16% to 11%. The Greens should rise to 9%. Others shouldn't take in much. It's hard to measure others. The litany of smaller parties in the by-election, and the Lib Dems should have taken 7. What happened was 39-39, 7 for the Conservatives, 7 for the Greens. The Greens, note that the Conservatives were squeezed by 4 points relative to their forecast, and the Greens were, I suppose, squeezed by 7 relative to their forecast. Others, of course, played a role. but interestingly enough, the Lib Dems were squeezed by 4. I think it's fair to say that what happened in this election, obviously it was characterised as Reform versus Labour. Obviously the smaller parties were squeezed. The way I understand it on the ground, though, is that the Lib Dems were a lot more willing to be squeezed by Labour in the fight against Reform, fight against Farage. But the Greens, however, activist voters, were a little less keen on voting tactically to keep a party of the right out. Lib Dems were happy to vote tactically. Green voters, I don't think, were. Interesting enough, during the campaign, it became pretty clear that the Conservative vote in parts of rural Cheshire wasn't in free fall, but it wasn't coming first or second. And these are the parts of Cheshire where they have councillors. And there was one stage where in Mickle Trafford a group of Labour activists met with a group of Conservative activists, and one of the Labour activists was asking them how they were doing, and the Conservatives gave quite a look which could only suggest we are trying to hold on to our deposit. And that's what happened. They held on to their deposit by a margin of a few hundred votes, and they did quite well. What happened in Runcorn and Helsby as well, very important here, is turnout. So normally in a by-election, turnout is half, or just a touch over half of what it is in a general election. So if in a general election 100% of your seat turns out to vote, in a by-election that'll fall to around 50 to 60%. Okay, what happened in Runcorn and Helsby? Let's be frank, a more apathetic part of England than the normal, a more working class, frankly, poorer part of the country than most, turnout was 80% of what it was in the general. Frankly, the by-election was pretty good for turning people out. For 80% of the GE turnout to turn out is not normal in a by-election. You could have read that in multiple ways. You can read that in multiple ways. First of all, squeeze. Tactical voting, an effort by Labour to get anti-reform voters out, seems to have worked in some parts. On the ground, I know it worked in County Cheshire, rural County Cheshire, the Gowie villages, Mickle Trafford, Guildon, Sutton. It might have worked to some extent in Helsby, though it was represented by a Green councillor there. That's where the Green candidate represents. I understand in Helsby, Labour did just come ahead of Reform because I think the Greens proved the spoiler there. But in Runcorn proper, let's just go back to that election result. It was here in Runcorn Heath, in Grange, Halton Lodge, Palacefields, Halton, Castlefields, Astmore, Dukesfield, all the way up to Brookvale and Norton. Reform swept, and swept pretty comfortably. And what Reform did, which offset that tactical voting effort by Labour, will simply turn out more voters, which seems like a statement of the obvious, but it is. The way I describe it is how Labour lost Runcorn, which you can find on BritainElects.com, was I think it came down to the number of votes cast, which is the simple answer to it. The number of votes cast overperformed the expected for a by-election, and Reform turned out a hell of a lot more people than anyone ever expected. And we can, you read that piece, go to BritainElects.com, you read that I've written, and it pretty much exposes very well how Reform does this. They talk to people who parties normally do not speak to. Okay, that is not what a campaign with very very few resources can do. Excuse me while I go and get the chat up here. They went to places, people who on paper should be voting, so people over the age of 65, people over the age of 50, but are either not registered to vote or have a history, according to the marked register, of not voting. And what they do to those is they send them a lot of direct mail. And the direct mail they send are things akin to, you have been ignored. And you know what? These voters would agree with that. Because campaigns do not go to their doors. Because campaigns look at their voting history, see that they don't vote, and assume, yeah, you don't vote. Why should I bother? That's the interesting thing. That's the important thing here. Okay? So, there's no other way to put it. Reform went to voters who other parties wouldn't, and it worked. It worked, and they should be very, I suppose, be proud of that. Now, What else can we look at? So just to confirm that, I would say the Britain Predicts model. I'm pleased. I'm not unhappy about that. But it wasn't perfect. It assumed Labour would eke a lead on average over Reform, because the uncertainty in that election was Reform turning out non-voters. Some pollsters are having a much better job of turning out non-voters. Some pollsters are showing... No, stop, let me say that again. Some pollsters are showing Reform making a much better go at turning out non-voters. Other pollsters don't show it at all. And the pollsters which show Reform turning out non-voters in a quite dramatic fashion are also the pollsters putting Reform ahead by a wider margin. And if you look at how England voted, or how a certain part of Shire England voted on Thursday, the simple truth is that it points to Reform doing much better than what the polls say today. Let's just go back to the... where's the poll tracker? Let's go to who's ahead in the polls. Let's just remind ourselves of where things are. Let's zoom in on this here. The polls right now nationally, although this was last updated at the end of April, point to Reform being on 25%. That's up 11 points on the last election. Okay, last year, not even a year ago, actually. Labour are on 24%, down 11 points. The Tories are on 22%, down 3. Lib Dems are up 1 on 14, and the Greens are up 2 on 9. These local elections point to Reform being much further ahead than today. Sorry, these local elections, than what these polls are saying. These polls point to Reform being ahead by, 2 points? The local elections point to Reform being ahead by much more than that. As to what it is, well, check out the New Statesman as in my next piece. I'll write about it there. Okay. But anyway, if you wish to join the conversation, ask me a question. I'll try and get through them. I will try and answer some of them, but there is an error with the chat. I can't read all the messages, but I'm trying to. But thank you very much for joining us. Harry Painter asks, are there shy reformers when being polled? Maybe. It's quite possible, but there's another facet to this, which is that non-voters saying they are certain to vote is an unreliable thing. Non-voters saying they want to vote is an unreliable thing. So to be honest with you, polling historically looks at those non-voters, looks at their certainty to vote and says, really? Are you really going to turn out? And more often than not, actually, in history, they don't. They don't. So the maths, the body of evidence in history suggests these voters wouldn't turn out. Well, guess what? They are now. So, hello, pollsters. Maybe it's time we had to think. You know. What do I got here? How do you think Reform will do next year in Wales and Scotland? Very well. In Wales, I think it's fair to say that Reform and Conservatives are probably odds on to form the next government in Wales, with the Senate elections, with electoral reform, coming in. Frankly, electoral reform ends, I think, the guarantee of Labour in some way, shape or form running Wales. Because right now, if an election was held now, Labour plus Plaid plus Lib Dems could reach about between 45 and 55% of the Senate. Okay, so there's a half chance there of less than half. They have a decent chance of not getting a majority yet. There's a decent chance in Wales of there not being a progressive majority. Think on that when you consider electoral reform. Hitchhiker's Pie asked, do you think this speaks to Lib Dems or especially Greens that as non-establishment parties they should also target those voters? I think the way, look, if you're a campaign and you have only a dozen activists and you have a finite amount of time, you have a budget of 500 quid, if that, and you need to win a parliamentary election, where would you go? You would be trying to convert the people who have a history, a reliability of voting. That's appreciable, of course you would, because the chances of a non-voter voting, based on history, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. What they do is they go for the most probable outcome, which is go for those who do vote. Maybe that's time for a change. Maybe the growing irritation, exhaustion by voters with the status quo in whatever form it is, be it, the system, be it the economy, be it immigration, be whatever it is, be it identity politics, maybe there's a body of people out there who are waiting to be turned out. Something to think about. Chances of first past the post being abolished for local elections in England, not anytime soon. I don't see it happening with a Labour majority government. I don't think. But anyway, let's just remind ourselves of the polls. I'm sorry, I don't think I showed you this. So just remind yourself, what is it? Reform right now polling 25%, Labour 24%, Tories 22%, Lib Dems 14%, Greens 9%. That is based on the polls as of the 24th of April. Okay, so before the local elections. And the local elections point to a result that is more reform friendly than what these numbers suggest. Okay, the projected national share by the BBC, by Sky, by Rallings Thrasher and others has reform doing better than this. And I would put it to you that if you look at the actual numbers, if you look how well reform did in Runcorn, if you consider the fact that turnout is not crashing and it's not, relative to other local elections, relative to other mid-term contests, it's not low turnout, is it? Something to think on there, okay? Now, let's consider my most unpopular, my biggest fumble of this election season. The local election forecast. So the forecast had the Conservatives to come away with the most council seats. But note, by the way, this was them losing half of what they were up. They came away. They came into this election defending more than 1,000 seats. My model said they would come away with 480 something. Reform would win 300, Lib Dems 300, Labour 300. Okay, others 100 and Greens 56. I'm delighted that the only one I got reasonably close was the Independents. I said they would get 109 and they ended up with 94, and I'll consider that a dramatic win for my modelling. Okay, but there is no question that what happened in the local elections of May the 1st is reform overperforming. Reform outperformed any and all reasonable expectations. You can look at forecasts or, frankly, predictions by people who put fingers in the air and look at numbers and just guess them. You know they exist. We all know they exist. I don't see any mathematical modelling from them. I dismiss them out of hat. But I have to say, these results come closer to some of these absolutely mad, baseless predictions. Hats off to them for finger in the air for forecasts, getting closer than what I anticipated. Yeah, look, Tories are down 20 points on where they were in 2021. Labour are down 10 points. On that swing alone, Labour should have been making some gains. But the reform spoiler should have eaten into the Tories disproportionately, and Labour may have been able to eke out some gains. That was the theory in the model, and it made sense, and it still makes sense in my head. But the simple reality was, reform just outperformed all that. It didn't matter. Wherever reform went, reform won or almost won. Yeah. So, the final numbers are this. My forecast said reform 311. The result was reform 677. The Lib Dems were forecast to get 314. They ended up with 370. Not bad going for the forecast. Tories, 483 seats. That was down from 1,000. They now won 319. Also down from 1,000. They lost, what's that? That's 2/3 of their seat and a little bit much. A little bit much more than that, yeah? Labour, 334. Look at that. An underperformance on a grand scale there. That's absolutely ridiculous. Winning just 98 council seats. And just bear in mind, that's down on their defeat in 2021, which was a virtual repeat of the 2019 general election. What happened in 2021 was a repeat of Boris Johnson's Get Brexit Done win for Labour. Labour did as badly as that. So for them to win is, in essence, or rather lose, in essence, 2/3 of their 2019 defeat is disastrous for the government of the day. Greens picked up a few dozen. I said they'd pick up a few dozen. They picked up a few dozen more than I expected. And yeah, that pretty much answers that. I'll try and answer a few more questions here. Let's just go back to the chat. Did you have a prediction for overall percentages versus actuals? I didn't do an overall percentages. Do you think your forecast missed so much because it is so volatile to predict what will happen on the first past the post with voters split so many different ways? Yes, that pretty much is it. There's so much volatility right now. The polls either point to Reform on 29% or Reform on 21%. Okay, that's what the numbers suggest right now. There's an absolute variety, and I'm delighted, by the way, with pollsters publishing variety. I hate herding. Herding helps no one. Reform massively overperformed in Oxfordshire, 18% of the vote in the country, but only gained 1 seat. 2 of the near gains by Reform were actually in Oxford City itself, Leys and Barton. I think there's a part of Oxford, particularly Oxford East, that is quite working class, needs a bit of love and attention, and yeah, Reform should have a bit of appeal there. I don't know if Leys and Barton is that bit of Oxford, but yeah, if Reform can, come close in some bits of Oxford, then yes, that illustrates it. The way I was talking about this with friends yesterday in the pub, because that's what I like to talk about, and I said, the best way to summarise with the broad appeal of Reform is that they were winning in parts of Salisbury, which UKIP never did, which UKIP never came close to doing, which a more radical right-wing party has never, ever come close to doing. Parts of Salisbury, posh Salisbury, affluent Salisbury, middle-class Salisbury, were voting in Reform candidates. This idea that it's just the revenge of white working-class England that speaks to how little you know about politics. It's more than that. It's more than that. The projected national share, according to the BBC and others, was 30% or thereabouts. I think that's about right. For the first time in a while, I'm looking at the projected national share and I'm thinking, those bods, I think they've got it right. Yeah. Are Reform underestimated in the polling, or are the voters just much more enthusiastic to vote, in your view? They are more enthusiastic, absolutely. Polling is of those who are certain to vote. People who were previously non-voters are going to be underweighted, because they have a history of not voting as opposed to voting, okay? And frankly, therefore they're being underweighted. So are we undersampling? Are we under other polls missing Reform? Yeah, I think they are. You do see the volatility in the west of England. It depends on which parts you polls as well. Turns out we don't like having... Okay, thank you. Do you think it will be better to show a range of outcomes when doing the forecast? I think so. The way I described it, if you go to my forecast for Runcorn and Helsby, you would see that the range for Labour was tighter than the range for Reform. Reform were expected to get between 30 and 40% of the vote in Runcorn and Helsby. For Labour, it was more like 31-32% to 39% in Runcorn and Helsby. So, tells you all you need to know there. There is more uncertainty about the Reform vote because it's relying on the unreliable. It's an unreliable strategy, but it worked. It worked in this election just gone. So, let's go back to that. So, not even close. My local election forecast, not even close. But Runcorn and Helsby, close enough, and I'm taking that to the bank, and I'm going to be, everywhere I go, I'll continue to talk up the decent model that is Britain Predicts. Imperfect, as are all models, but I would say, honest, this is a win. This is a win because I think you had other models. I think Stats for Lefties. I don't understand his model. I'm not sure anyone does. Giving Reform a very comfortable lead. I think other models, other Twitter accounts, without people attached to them, giving it others. I think Britain Predicts won that, and I'm very pleased with that. Okay, but anyway, let's go back to the results. Just so you know, let me say that again. I am able to see your comments, and I will try and answer them when I get a moment. So James says, for the pure first past the post chaos, you only need to see Exeter, where Labour won the popular vote but lost every division they held, and that summarises it very much. Shall we go have a look at Exeter? Let's start with Exeter, but you can find this map on newstatesman.com. Go to newstatesman.com, scroll down to they have a wonderful part of the website which lists the articles based on their popularity. You're not going to find it on the front page, but if you scroll down to the most popular bit, you'll find this at number 1 right now. I think it's still at number 1. I hope it is, otherwise I'd be putting egg on my face there. But let's look at Exeter. Go to newstatesman.com and you can find this map. Welcome to Exeter. Do we see any Labour red here? Well, first of all, let's look at how it voted in 2021, sorry. And you can see Labour winning the city. It is a city, isn't it? It is a city, I'm sure it is. Let's look at Exeter Central, which is St David's and Haven Banks division. Although, I'm just going to keep calling it a ward. And you can see where it went. Green gain. Green's up 9 points. Labour down 17 points. Reform up 15 points. Labour, coming second, sits closer to third place than it does first place. And this was a seat they won. This is Exeter Centre. Go to another ward, St Sidwell's and St James Ward. Ooh, Green's just eking out a slim lead there. Labour down 18, 19. Green's up 14. Reform up 13. Yeah, something to think about there. That looks like my ward. I wonder if my ward will be like that in a few years' time. Exwick and St Thomas Ward. Reform win this. This is on the other side of the... What's this? Is it the Exmouth River? What is it? Is it what it? I don't know. I don't know what it is. On the other side of Exeter, you have Reform winning this part of the world. 32% of the vote. Labour 32%. Greens 18%. Topsham Ward, which was a part of the world, Labour, illustrated Labour's advance a few years ago. Labour falling short there. Tories down 17 points, Labour down 4. You know that in other parts of the world that will be enough to give Labour the seat, but there's not enough other parts of the world like this. The simple truth is, is Reform were eating into Labour and Tory votes. I wouldn't say equally, but more substantially of Labour than what this result illustrates. And let's just look at which divisions changed hands. And you can see there. Which divisions changed hands? Almost, oh my God, every division in Exeter, with the exception of Topsham and Wearside, changed hands. All change in England. All change in Devon. A hell of a lot of change in Cornwall. Truro proper voting in Lib Dem candidates pretty comfortably, but look at that. Only with 21% of the vote. Only with 21% of the vote. That's mad. That's mad. There's another one, isn't there, round here, where the candidate just wins with 18% of the vote. Welcome to first past the post and its many chaoses. And it's hilarious how in other divisions, Poole and Tahiti ward here, Reform come away with 51%. In another ward, the winner is 37%, 40, 37. What about, where's the 18% one? Yeah, certified, as Duolingo 055 says, certified first past the post banger. That is mental. You're quite right. What about Bodmin, which famous for Bodmin? Two-thirds Lib Dem. You can make a joke there if you want, but I think it's far beneath me to make something like that. But anyway, that's the West Country for you. Reform and Lib Dems competing for the most gains there. That's ridiculous. Interesting here, right here in Ilfracombe, Lee. I was on holiday here a few years ago. Greens win that from the Conservatives. Tories down 28. Reform up 25. Greens up 5 and win that seat. I wouldn't say by default, but you know it's quite clear where the momentum was, and it was with the Tories there. What else can we look at? Let's just go back to the 2021 results. So here's a look of Shire England. Here's how it voted in 2021, although in the case of Hull and East Yorks, this is how it voted in 24. What else? What else can we look at here? Let's look at Kent. Here's how Kent voted in 2021. Disaster for Labour. Disaster for Labour. Disaster for anyone but the Conservatives here. And here's how it voted in 2025. Dramatic. Dramatic. The whole coast of the whole east coast of Kent, from Dover up to Margate, Reform. Ramsgate, Reform by 40%, with the Greens in second place, and Labour, who represented this back in 2017, third. What about Ramsgate itself, which was once Labour? Margate, sorry. Reform 37, Labour 30. Labour down at 11 there compared to Ramsgate, which they were down by also 11. Broadstairs, which is the more posher part of the Isle of Thanet, Yeah, you notice Labour's fall from grace isn't quite so great in the posher parts of the conurbation that we're looking at here. Greens, though, pull in a decent second. Reform winning with just a third of the vote. Corpse for Life says disaster for Labour pretty much sums it all up, and there's no question of that. This is a disaster for Labour. They held on in Canterbury proper, Canterbury City there. Look at that, the Labour vote just down by half a percentage point. I think Labour strategists should be interviewing this councillor in Canterbury. What on earth happened there? And yeah, Canterbury City South, the Labour vote just down 2 points. Well done them. I'll be getting in touch to find out what happened there. Canterbury North, which is frankly just the outskirts plus the rural bits. Lib Dems sweep this seat off the Conservatives, who fall 33 points compared to the Lib Dems rising by 20. Reform coming in a decent second there. Faversham also going Lib Dem, staying Lib Dem, but the Lib Dems get cut a little bit in the face of the Reform onslaught. The Isle of Sheppey, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, which has a strong independent bunch of people. Reform swept them away. Reform swept them away pretty comfortably. You can see that there. The independent group here falling 23 points. Reform up 46. Another part of the world, Reform up to almost 50%. Labour coming second. Tories third in a seat they once held. The Isle of Sheppey itself, gain from the Conservatives. You know, Reform winning this by a canter. What's that? A majority of 30 points there. Absolutely mad. Absolutely mad indeed. What about this? Ockenden and Thurrock, which used to be a UKIP target not so long ago. UKIP said they wouldn't target here again after 2015 because, frankly, it would get too diverse for them to appeal to. And you see, look at that, though. Reform winning this with 50% of the vote. 50% of the vote. Goodness me. Hainault. Labour holding by one vote. One vote over an independent candidate. Reform putting in 21% here. 21% in this bit of Redbridge is interesting. That bodes, I don't want to say ill for London next year, but I would put it to you that in Romford, in Havering, given consideration to the fact that Reform are smashing the independents up on the Isle of Sheppey, coming out of nowhere, same here on Swale West, I think in Havering, where there's a strong independent groupings, trouble abounds for them, because I think Reform are gunning for Romford, they're gunning for Dagenham, and who knows what will happen in Barking, where the BNP once had strength. Times are changing, aren't they? Times are definitely changing. We had some by-elections in Norwich, where the Greens held on to Mancroft Ward. I only have the seat history for 2022 here, which is very annoying, but I just want to let you know that this was a part of Norwich that Labour were winning back during the day of when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. So times are very different now, and look at that. Ward held by Labour as far, back in 2018, 2016, and now Labour are coming third in it. To Reform, we're coming second. The Greens are winning this with 55% of the vote. Very interesting indeed. Let's go to Cambridgeshire. Let's just remind ourselves how it used to look. Cambridge had a strong Labour presence there. The Isle of Ely voted in Lib Dems. Huntingdon, voting in Independents and Lib Dems and Tories there. South Cambridgeshire saw some pretty sizable gains for Lib Dems. How did it go in 2025? Lib Dem advance. Reforms take North Cambridgeshire. They take the Fens over here, Fenland. Although they miss out, interestingly enough, they miss out on Wisbech West and Wisbech East. Very interesting there. Although, not by much. Although it's very interesting to note that in Wisbech West, Tories only fall 9. When in other parts of the world have been falling something like 30, 40 with numbers like that. Very interesting indeed. Something's happened there for the Tories. Cambridge. Frankly, it's a bit of a disaster for Labour here. Cambridge Central, which is Market Division. Lib Dems sweep this from Labour. Labour on 27%, with Lib Dems on 42. Labour down 10, Lib Dems up 8. Compare this to how Labour is doing in the more working class parts of England. and you would note this 10.4 for Labour isn't half bad. They're falling much further and much faster in the whiter, in the more working class parts of England. Arbury, which they held on, they fell by 11 points. Castle division, Lib Dems win this with just a third of the vote. The part of Cambridge, the Greens won. Newnham ward, interesting layout as you can see there. That's really interesting. Greens coming from nowhere to win this ward with 51% of the vote. Shocking stuff there for Labour. What about Hertfordshire? Let's remind ourselves how it looked before. Tories. What about now? Lib Dems, with actually some decent Tory holds. What about this one? Lily, Hitchin, Rural. Didn't someone tell me in this chat? We did a stream here the day before the election, and someone, I think, said to me, watch out for this one, the Greens are going for this. Yeah, the Greens got 9% and fell 13 points. What happened here? Reform got 22. They picked up 22 points. Greens down 13, Tories down 15. Something to always bear in mind. I say this every time we have elections, which is that you need to appreciate the appeal of reform. The appeal of the Greens can sometimes transcend one another. It can sometimes merge into one another. At the end of the day, people are anti-establishment. People want to shake things up. They want to say up yours to the system. And I gave this example. I've given it many times before. There was a part of Sheffield where the Reform candidate didn't stand. And the Green candidate got a share of the vote that my model said would have been Reform plus Green. So my model anticipated how the seat would have voted with the Reform candidate. And what the Green candidate eventually got was the Green share of the vote I expected and the Reform share of the vote. Something to bear in mind, that the appeal of Reform, can sometimes with the appeal with the Greens. The Green appeal is not just, pink-haired activists, to be crude here, okay? The Green appeal is more than that. And we just need to bear that in mind when we make assumptions about voters, okay? And Hitchhiker's Pie says it himself. People who watch this stream are very unrepresentative of the electorate. Absolutely. Very unrepresentative. But anyway. Oh, Furious Swan steps in today to say he was very mistaken. Thank you for owning up that, Furious Swan. It's a yeah, well done. All credit to you for that. I wasn't calling you out personally, but nice of you to show up. Stevenage itself. Remember Stevenage Woman, that Labour was desperate to win over? Well, it looks like Labour has lost them. Coming third in central Stevenage, right by the railway station. Reform 35%, Tories 27%, Labour 23%. North Stevenage, which is called Old Stevenage, very interesting here. Reform win this with 34% of the vote. Labour 26%. And very interesting to note, this was won by Labour in 2013, won by Labour in 2017, won by the Tories in 2021, and Reform sweep this out of Labour's hands by an 8-point margin. St Nicholas, also Reform gain from the Conservatives here. Chels ward, which had a by-election here not so very long ago. Lib Dems held that. My model said it would have gone Reform. But my model is based on general election modelling, and the Lib Dems have a local strength here. What else? Sheppel ward, Reform 39, Labour 27. Goodness me. All of Stevenage voting Labour there. What about this? Letchworth Garden City, Hitchin proper splitting between Lib Dems who hold that and Labour who also hold that. But no, it's the 10-11 point fall in the Labour vote. Letchworth South, Lib Dems gain this from the Tories. Labour gets squeezed. Reform put in a performance, but Tories fall 22. Lib Dems advance 18 to take that quite comfortably. Letchworth North, Labour hold here. Look at that though. Labour falls 16 points. Reform advance 26 points, but the Tories fall 22, and Labour hold on to that, not by the skin of their teeth, but pretty tight go in anyway. I understand this had a very tight Labour majority not so long ago, and the Labour majority is actually just that little bit bigger now. It used to be a very tight Tory versus Labour contest. Now it's a, Labour versus Reform contest. with a Labour majority that's just that little bit larger, a little bit bigger. And look at this one. Here's an interesting one as well. Baldock and Letchworth East. Labour gained this with 7-point advance in support completely against the grain. Tories down 15, Reform up 18. What happened there? A squeeze in Lib Dem versus Green. Labour advanced 7, Tories down 15, Reform up 18, and Labour gained that. That's what I was expecting to see more of. Interesting. I think Labour strategists should be going up to Letchworth to understand what went right there. Very interesting indeed. Let's move to another part. Let's stay with how this looks in 2021. Just remember, if you want to get a hold of this, you can go to newstatesman.com. Shall we go there, actually? Let's go up right now. Go here. You can read all the good pieces here. Why Labour Shouldn't Shift Right by John McTernan. George Eaton writes why it's now Reform versus Labour. Absolutely right there. David Gork says the Tories are in danger of irrelevance. And I can agree with that completely. Andrew Marr says, does Farage own the future? Yes. How winter fuel cost Labour these elections by Megan Kenyon. I think absolutely right. If anyone went to Runcorn and Helsby, they would know. It wasn't necessarily immigration that was being mentioned on the doorstep. It was the decision by Labour to cut winter fuel as one of their most memorable policy successes. I think policy decisions, and the decisions also to go hard on PIP, which I've met people who work in welfare, who work in getting people, homeless people housed, who work in this sort of the world, and they can't for the life of themselves, despite being very friendly to Labour, understand that decision on PIP. And I wrote for myself over at Britain Elects how Labour lost Runcorn, and look, the voters, what they said on the doorstep was this: I don't understand what you are doing to me. I don't understand what these guys down south, what these guys in London, what these guys who call themselves Labour are doing to people like me. That summarises the reason Labour lost Runcorn. That summarises this absolute collapse in support for Labour across the country. That summarises why Reform is at 25% plus in the opinion polls. And I suspect it may just go that little bit bigger in the future. But if you want to find the map, go to newstatesman.com, scroll down past the magazine and go to the most read. Damn it, I'm not at number 1, I'm at number 2. Live results, 2025 English local elections, and you can get it over there. So, let's go back to how things looked in 2021. In Wiltshire, let's see how they look now. Lib Dems advance. This, by the way, has some very surprising Tory holds, okay? And the Tories only fall by 10 to 15 points. The Tories did something very interesting in Wiltshire. Maybe Wiltshire is just that little bit too affluent, I don't know. But their holds stood up. And you can see it when you go to VoteShare. So I want you to look at this map now. This map tells you how the VoteShare by party. Can you see Wiltshire? Yes, of course you can, because it's the darkest shade of the whole of the seat, the whole of Shire England. Look at that. This is where the Tory strength still remains. And you look in other parts of Oxfordshire, you see much lighter shades of red. Interesting, isn't it? Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, these are the seats they're sharing with Reform. Interesting enough, it's some of the most southernmost divisions where they have strength, and some of the most northernmost. Wooler Ward, look at this. The Tories getting 2/3 of the vote. It's pretty abnormal for them, and it stands up. It shows up, doesn't it, on this map? If we look at it, how about for Labour? Where is Labour's strength in these council elections of 2025? It's non-existent, isn't it? It's very much non-existent. Some of the stronger divisions actually came first in the counts. Blythe Central, which is Wensleydale Ward. Labour getting 43% is considered strong for them, and they lost that one. What about this part of Shrewsbury? Castlefields and Ditherington. Labour get 52% there. Pretty strong ward for them, but again, we're counting on Shrewsbury as one of their stronger wards. We're counting on this part of Chorley as one of their stronger wards. Are we counting on the surrounds of Blackpool? No, because Labour are coming away with 20% there. Where else? This bit of Stroud, which, let's be honest with you, it's not the bedrock of the workers' movement, is it? Nailsworth, 40% Labour. Greens on 29%. That's one of Labour's strongest seats that was won this election. Oh, and there's another one, don't worry, I'm so sorry. Rame Peninsula and St Germans in Cornwall. Labour win this with... is that right? Sometimes I see a result like this and I think, is that right? I'm going to double check this after the stream, I think. But Labour win this part of Cornwall with 2/3 of the vote, up 25 points. I want to also just look at another part of Buckinghamshire, if you don't mind. This was an interesting one. Labour won this. And this is one of those wards where it was a 3-member ward and the Labour candidate got 1,000 votes more than everyone else, and the other Labour candidate's got 1,000 votes less than that candidate. Very much a personal vote for the Labour candidate here. Shocking stuff indeed. Okay, let's go back to the colours people like. And let's just remind ourselves of the West of England mayoralty here. Labour held this against the odds. Polls said the Greens might gain this, but I think that might have something to do, again, with poor polling samples. Here's the thing you need to bear in mind. If you get 100 people in the West of England, you need to make sure it's representative of every part of the West of England. If half of the West of England is Bristol, half of your sample needs to be from Bristol, at the most. Okay? What we saw in the Runcorn and Helsby polling by Lord Ashcroft, and what I think we may have seen in polling of the West of England, is an oversampling of some parts and an undersampling of others. Okay? All right, just something to bear in mind there. And thank you to Chloe for just getting in touch. That is wrong. Just check Cornwall Council website and you missed out a Reform candidate who got 29%. So this, let's just go back to this. Rame Peninsula and the St Germans, absolutely wrong. So one of the strongest it seems, ward for Labour in this election is an error. It's an error. Interesting stuff indeed. But you get the point I made about the West of England, which is that some pollsters need to poll them better. But what happened here in the West of England? Labour win this with 25% of the vote, Reform just about missing out on 22%, and the Greens coming in third with a slightly squeezed vote share on 20%. And I reiterate what I said elsewhere. The Green appeal is similar to Reform's. Of course, it's not the same. Of course, not every Green voter is going to go Reform, but some do and some have. Will it be enough to cost their Green strategy at the next election? Whatever the Green strategy is, I don't know. But just bear that in mind. Yeah. Emil asks, let me just get this one up. But which part, except for Scotland, Wales, is the most interesting coming up in 2026? Well, I'm actually most interested in Wales because, everywhere is going to be interesting next year because, again, we are in an abnormal time where an insurgent party is polling close to 30% of the vote, even though officially right now they're on 25. Look, let's be honest, it's closer to 30 if you use these results. What's going to be the most interesting? Urban England, to be honest with you. Look at this. Let's just go back to the results surrounding. Let's look at a council by-election in Rochdale. Reform gain this, again from nowhere. Labour fall against, the Workers' Party of Great Britain. George Galloway's movement is somehow still alive. What does that mean for the rest of Oldham? What does that mean for Tameside? What does that mean for Bolton? What does that mean for Wigan? Lisa and Andy's backyard. What does it mean for when Andy Burnham lives? What does that mean for the surrounds of Bradford, for Wakefield, for South Yorkshire proper, for Rotherham? I think it means absolute chaos for Labour. And are they ready? I think, to tell you the truth, as we're streaming right now, a great many Labour groups, a great many Labour parties are coming together either for a drink or two, and they may be despairing. They may be panicking, to say the least. And they may be overcorrecting as a consequence. But I would put it to them. Go to BritainElects.com, read this piece, How Labour Lost Runcorn. Okay? Give it a like if you can. Read that piece, How Labour Lost Runcorn. And the lesson in Runcorn is simple. Whole swathes of Halton, whole swathes of Runcorn proper hadn't been knocked on the door by a Labour canvasser in years, if not more than a decade. Labour deserved that loss on paper because they hadn't knocked for it a long, long time. Meanwhile, in the parts of the Gowie villages, Mickle Trafford, Guild and Sutton, Helsby and Frodsham, which Labour went on to hold, Labour had been knocking those doors all year round. They had a strong local campaign. It worked. 2 Labour councillors gained Frodsham from the Conservatives on a huge swing in 2023, and that ward stayed true to Labour. Why? Because for the past year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, without fail, there were Labour canvassers going out to knock doors. Could you say the same in Runcorn for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years? I don't think we can. I don't think we can. And what that means for parts of Haywood, Middleton, what that means for West Yorkshire, what that means for Barnsley, what that means for parts of England where there is a strong Labour presence but very little Labour activity on the ground, I think the results have already written themselves. Think on that. And this ward here, Rossendale West, one of the more affluent parts of Lancashire, one of the only seats for Labour to hold. Meanwhile, they lost the surrounds of Accrington, Rishton, the villages of Accrington West, went to the Greens. The Green appeal here has a lot to do with its relationship with the Muslim community in the seat. They did very well there. You scroll meanwhile up to Burnley Central East. Like I said in my previous streams, a lot of these were meant to go to the independent, the pro-Gaza, the pro-Palestinian independent candidates. Some of them have some quite interesting views. And, you know, the results wrote themselves, didn't they? But Reform swept it all. And Andrew Teal called this his eye-opening result, what happened in Lancashire. And let's just remind ourselves of how it looked long ago. In 2021, a completely different world. And you see it there. Reform sweep, not just urban, white working class England. They're sweeping the Ribble Valley. They're sweeping Clitheroe. They're sweeping the rural bits of Lancaster. Meanwhile, the Greens are sweeping the urban bits of Lancaster. Reform are winning in Morecambe, Morecambe North, Morecambe Central, Morecambe South. Heysham. Sound like a train announcer here. Absolutely mad. And the only bits the Tories held on to was Lytham St Anne's, which, you know, I meet people from here and they say, you know, a donkey with a blue rosette would win in Lytham St Anne's. This part of northern England was one of the few parts of northern semi-working class England to vote in a Conservative parliamentarian. Absolutely mad. Absolutely mad. And just remind yourself, this is how England, Shire England, looks if you only look at the seats which changed hands. A lot of Lib Dem yellow down south, but the Lib Dem yellow is competing with that Reform teal, turquoise, whatever colour it is. I might need to change those colours when I get some time because I hope it's more visible to you. Let's look at some of these questions here. I think Reform will give Labour a bloody nose in the next elections. I think you're quite right, sceptical, unless Labour changes tack and learns how to campaign again. Adam Waters asks, how do you think independent performances last week bode for next year? I think they're going to stay. I think I think Labour's relationship, particularly with Muslim voters and minority voters more generally, is a poor assumption. You can't make the assumption that brown people are going to stay with Labour till death do us part. I think that's a very offensive assumption. I don't think it works. I think migrant populations, ethnic minority populations are a little bit more complicated than I just got off the boat, I'm going to vote for the Progressive Party. It's a bit more complicated than that. And it has a lot to do with the fact people are settling, people have their own priorities, their own views. Voters are voters. Voters look beyond their own self-survival. And what you're seeing with more settled migrant communities is they're thinking, I care more about issues other than whether I'm going to be kicked out or not. And they don't think they're going to be kicked out. They don't think their position in this country is under threat. And so what happens is they go searching. They're more settled voters look beyond self-survival. It's not rocket science, and we're seeing that with a great many more migrant communities. What happened in 2021, and I wish I could show you this, I hope I can show you this. No, I can't. It's very annoying there. Oh, I think I could. If we Google it, 2021, no, 2021, local elections, Britain elects. Let's go here. Where is it? Ward by ward. Let's go down here. Here's the 2021 local elections, and let's just look at Blackburn. Okay, look at this one. This is really interesting. Audley and Queen's Park Ward. Can you see that? This was a shocker one. This was a shocker, this. And what happened here is, and that's not an error, I checked this, I double checked this, because I remember the winning Tory candidate, Tiger Patel, if you remember him. He won this by being a local champion. You saw it elsewhere, Ewood, Ewood, whatever. But just to get to the bottom of it is, minority voters are looking beyond self-survival, and if they're pissed off with Labour, they are going to go searching, and they did, and they have, and they are continuing to do so. They are continuing to do so. And Labour, if Labour wants to be reliant on minority voters, well, I think they need to redevelop their strategy, because I don't think it's going to work. Should we go to some other questions? Can you review your Oxfordshire results, because there were a couple of wrong wards? I will do. How do you think in performance last year? Yeah, just to answer Adam's question, I think it's going to stay that way, particularly amongst minority voters. Hello there says, in a not rude way, do you think that your ward could go reform? My ward, Chester City Centre and the Garden Quarter, no. It wouldn't go reform. Could go another way, absolutely could go another way. But I put it to you that Chester is not reform friendly enough for the city centre to go reform. Other wards, maybe, but not my ward. I think my ward will face challenges from elsewhere, and that's going to be very interesting, which means I will have to work harder, and I will. Oh, I'm already working hard anyway, I think I am. Patel's video campaign is iconic. Who could forget? Exactly. Tiger Patel there. Labour will be hurt in 2026. I'm a Lib Dem councillor in Barnsley. Any non-active candidate is doomed. And that's the lesson. If you are a councillor, if you are an incumbent in this age of anti-incumbency, and you are seen to be doing nothing, if you are not relevant, if you are not visible on the doorstep, kiss your seat goodbye and prepare to humiliate your party at the polls. Because that is what you're heading for. And I put it to all councillors of every incumbent nature, whatever party, is that you need to be visible to your residents. What are you here for? What are you being a councillor for, if not to represent your residents and fight for them and be the champion for them? You're not here to be, party boilerplate, partisan nonsense. You are here to be for your residents, and you need to be loud for them. I do that in Chester. We all do that in Chester, to be honest with you. Every one of our councillors does that. And, yeah. If Dan Norris gets proven guilty, what do you think will be the most likely to win? Aaron Banks MP or Rees Mogg comeback? I think the likelihood will be the Lib Dems. I think the likelihood will be the Lib Dems in North East Somerset and Hanham. Neither, to be honest with you. Look at Shropshire. I will. Did you already discuss what happened in Kent? Yes, you can probably rewind back, but I'll go back and have a look at it. Let's do that now. Kent, again, to reiterate, look at this. Reform winning not just in the seaside town of Margate, Ramsgate, not just gaining, this is how it looked in 2021. Here's how it looked in 2025. Not just winning in Margate, Ramsgate, not just winning Dover by 47%, Labour down 9. Not just winning bits of Folkestone, though the Lib Dems proved a spoiler here. Interesting. But winning, Ashford, winning Sevenoaks Rural South. And I have to say, doesn't Nigel Farage live around here? Actually, doesn't Nigel Farage live in what is one of the only remaining Tory divisions in the county? That's interesting. But Reform, winning not just on the coast of Kent, but winning in Dartford, winning in Gravesend, winning in Gravesham, winning, new build estates, winning Ebbsfleet International, winning the Isle of Sheppey. Interesting stuff. Okay. The point about North East Somerset my view is here, North East Somerset, which is here, the best bet, if Dan Norris is found guilty, if there's a by-election, is that the Lib Dems, not Labour, would have a better chance of holding that. And it might have something to do with the incumbent Labour MP tainting the Labour brand in that seat. I want to know whether the local Labour team agrees. Yeah. Anyway, What else? Any other questions? Corbs for Life, who is a regular watcher of my streams, with the Labour annihilation, do you now call on our Prime Minister to resign? Do you call him to resign, Minister? No comment. No comment. I've missed the start. Will there be recording? Hello, Paddy. Yes, you will be able to watch it all back on YouTube, youtube.com/@BritainElects. You'll all be able to watch this back later down the line. And we're already coming to hour one of this post-match analysis of this year's 2025 local elections. If you want to find this map, you can do so by going to newstatesman.com. Go there, look at the homepage, maybe read some of the articles. They're quite good. Scroll down to the most read, and you'll find it's at number 2 so far. Maybe we can get it up to number 1. If you want to read how Labour lost Runcorn, you can do so by going to BritainElects.com, scroll to how Labour lost Runcorn, and give it a read. Summarises it nicely. Let's go back to the results. Reminder, here's how the country voted in 2021, with the exception of Hull and East Yorkshire. And here's how it voted on Thursday just gone. Dramatic reform gains in the North and Midlands. Dramatic reform gains on the South Coast. Lib Dems resplendent in South Cambridgeshire, in Hertfordshire, in Buckinghamshire. Not in Buckinghamshire. Well, decent performance in Buckinghamshire, but not a sweep. Not a sweep. Decent performances in Oxfordshire. Decent performances in the Cotswolds, in Devon and Cornwall, and of course North Shropshire. So here's how North Shropshire voted in 2021. Lib Dem strength in the south of Shropshire in the middle. Notable performances in Shrewsbury. This is how the borough, the county voted in 2021 notionally, because these are new boundaries. And let's just scroll out again to get the full picture. And here's how it voted in 2025. Look at that. A dramatic swing. North Shropshire, no Conservative councillor, assuming Lowton ward is not in North Shropshire. Let's look at here. Oswestry. Oswestry North, Lib Dem gained from Green. Oswestry South, Greenhold. Salatin and Gabowen, Greens with 38% here, gain from the Conservatives, and right on the border with Wales, right on the border with Chirk Viaduct, which I very much like. Been on a walk there from Llangollen. St Martin's, that is a reform gain from the Conservatives. Ellesmere Urban, Lib Dems 41%, and Labour on a very measly 2%, a completely irrelevant 2% there. Whitchurch North, Whitchurch West, Whitchurch South, Lib Dem gain after Lib Dem gain, but reform in some places are on their toes. Market Drayton, Lib Dems gain that from the Conservatives. What about Shrewsbury proper? Greens putting in a presence here, holding on to their seat, holding on to their other. Labour holding on to some of theirs. Let's just do the changed hand seats. Bagley Ward goes Lib Dem from the Conservatives. Monkmore goes Lib Dem from the Conservatives. This one, interesting. Bellevue apparently goes Labour from the Conservatives. Notional results may be wrong. But that's offset by Sundawn on Hold Heath. Reform gained from Labour by the tiniest of margins, 42.4% to 42.2%. Another one. Battlefield Ward, reform gained from the Conservatives, reform with 33%, Lib Dems with 27%, Greens with 22%, and the Tories, who were the incumbents in this seat, coming in with 4th place. Truly, truly poor, disastrous showing for the Tories here. We were all talking about the government of the day, and rightly, they are the government of the day. But the real losers, the real losers of this election, is the Conservative Party. They are seeing so much of that which they once relied on being gutted by the reform onslaught. There may be assumptions that they will be able to win them round with a deal, with a pact, but I put it to you that a reform deal, a reform pact nullifies both the appeal of the Tories who don't vote reform, and it nullifies the appeal of reform who don't vote Conservative. A pact renders that a little bit useless, doesn't it? Renders both parties a little bit useless. Looking at Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, the Midlands corridor of old mining towns, of Bolsover, of Chesterfield, of what else we got in Mansfield, Hucknall, Ripley, Heanor, Ilkeston. Here's how they voted in 2021. Let's see how they looked. Let's see how they look on Thursday just gone. No competition. No competition. Reform, reform, reform. Even in Hucknall, where there used to be the Ashfield Independents, only one division went to the independent group, the Ashfield Independents, Hucknall North, and not by much. Jason Zadronsky, or is it Zardonsky? Can't pronounce. Do apologise. Didn't look it up in advance. He, Lib Dem candidate, independent candidate. He's put in a lot of, he's a very popular candidate in the past here. Did very well in the past. He lost his seat against the reform onslaught. Some personalities cannot save themselves, can they? As Adam Water says, welcome to the niche sub-community of Pokemon playing election nerds. Okay, thank you for that. I don't understand that. Conservatives hold Newstead. Not by much, though. It's as tight as Runcorn and Helsby. Conservatives, 36.9%. Reform, 36.9%. Look at that. Labour just down 5 points here. What about Bassett Law? Seat once of John Mann MP, who's now in the House of Lords. Oof, look at that. Labour down 27 points. An eye-watering collapse. Reform up 52%. 52 points. Worksop East. Labour down 24. Reform winning with 53. Worksop South. Labour down 14. Reform winning with 47. Dramatic collapses for Labour there. Doncaster, which Labour held the mayoralty of by the slimmest of margins because the Tories and Reform polled a similar share of votes. Well, what happened in the council election just gone? Well, with the exception of Doncaster proper, I remember going around here to get McDonald's once upon a time. Labour holds this bit, the bit I walked around in, with 36% of the vote. The racecourse of Doncaster goes to Reform by 37%. UKIP used to have conferences there. And the whole of the Doncaster surrounds the Don Valley. Although there is some Tory holds here. Interesting that. Look at that. Finningley Ward here. Tories hold with 34%, down 17 points. Reform just couldn't pip them there, could they? Very interesting. Bessacar Ward. Ooh. Both of the two parties suffer losses here. Labour down 11, Tories down 11, Reform up 28, but it wasn't enough to stop the Tories winning also on 28. What else can we look at? Kingston upon Hull. Hull and East Yorkshire. This went to the Reform candidate. Hull has 3 Labour MPs, and Labour in this locale came fourth with 14%. Let's just talk about another part of the world where Labour did absolutely disastrously in. Burnley. Burnley, where there's currently a Labour MP, or rather an MP elected as Labour. I don't think he's in the Labour Party, Labour Parliamentary Party any longer. Labour averaging pretty much around 10 to 15% of the vote in a seat they won off the Conservatives in 2024. What is going on here? This collapse, this gutting of the apparently Social Democratic Party. What is going on there? Ditto in Durham. So this is all entirely represented by Labour MPs right now in Parliament. Here's how it voted in 2021. Here's how it voted in 2025. Dramatic. Absolutely dramatic. The first ward to declare on election night, Hartlepool, Throston Grange, the by-election here. Labour won it in 2023 when they were recovering quite sizable shares of support with voters, and Reform win it without even a recount. 58% to Reform, Labour 32%, down 18%. Labour once won this with 50% of the vote, and the Tories just dare to put in a showing, standing their first candidate and getting 10%. Independent votes here, they went to Reform, and then Reform began to eat into Labour's share of support as well, and it got them the seat. Really interesting stuff. Some of the first wards to declare on the night in Northumberland. Blythe Valley and the surrounds, once represented by, what was the MP's name? Ronnie. Is it Ronnie Campbell? Ronnie Campbell, who was, I do miss a Geordie voice in the House of Commons. Wensleydale, which is Blythe Central. Reform gained this from Labour. Isabella, weird names. Reform gained this from Labour. Cowpen, Reform gained this from Labour. Bebside and Kitty Brewster, Reform gained this from the Conservatives, who gained this from Labour. You're getting a summary of the narrative of this election. The type of seats that the Reforms won to get their majority in 2019, the Reform are sweeping up without a recount. The type of seats Reform won are winning today are the type the Tories needed in 2019 to win a majority, and are the type Labour needs to hold on to its majority. Nuneaton. Reform gain from Labour. Tamworth. Reform swept this. Labour coming second in some wards, third, fourth in others. Lichfield, which Labour gained by the slimmest of margins against Michael Fabricated Hair. Reform 34 in Lichfield City North. Labour 25. Lichfield City South going to the Conservatives by 29%. Reform getting 26. And Labour 23. Burton upon Trent. A rare Labour gain from the Conservatives here. Labour activists in the chat can cheer, but it's one of the very few cheers. Labour gained that one off the Conservatives because Reform took too many Conservative votes. But don't worry, what about the rest of Burton? Reform gained from the Conservatives. Reform gained from the Conservatives. And a Conservative hold. Absolutely dramatic election results over and above what my model forecast. In Runcorn and Helsby, we did very well. A decent forecast. But in the local election forecast, absolute overperformance. My model followed the national polls. My model said Reform should get 300 council seats. They ended up with 677. My model said the Conservatives would win 483. They ended up with 319. My model said Labour should benefit from that two-party swing favouring them. They should get 334. They ended up with 98. An underperformance, a miss in my career of forecasting that exposes how the polls might be understating this new insurgent party. But in Runcorn and Helsby, the Britain Predicts model won again. The Britain Predicts model reigned supreme and did well enough. Well enough. My model said it would come down to a few hundred votes, and it came down to 6 votes. I'll take that. Right, what else can we talk about here? The polls, let's just remind ourselves, Reform 25%, Labour 24%, Tories 22%. Look, these local elections show up the polls to be wrong. These polls to be wrong. These local elections show the polls perhaps to be understating Reform by a few percentage points, overstating Labour by a few, overstating the Tories by 1 or 2, and the other parties, well, yeah, not sure yet. The question is, are these local election voting intentions, or are they something a bit more substantial? We don't know yet. But 2 things you need to bear in mind. Well, yeah, 2 things you need to bear in mind. The first is this. This is not a consequence of low turnout. This is not a consequence of turnout crashing. Okay? Northumberland, I've seen the numbers in Northumberland. I've seen the numbers in a great many councils. Turnout is pretty much the same as it was in 2021. In more competitive races, it's gone up. And I don't mean every competitive race. I mean in races where it's Reform versus whoever. Turns out in some races, where it's the Green versus the Conservatives or Green versus Labour, turnout's actually dropping. Where Reform is not a phenomenon, turnout is either staying still or falling. Where Reform are putting in absolute barnstorming performances, turnout is staying still or going up. Something to bear in mind there. The second thing you need to bear in mind is this. What does this mean for a general election? Well, we need to acknowledge, of course, that the polls may be understating Reform. So I'm just going to tab over to one of my forecasts that I have somewhere. Oh no, I deleted it. I deleted it in advance of this stream. What does this mean for the general election? Based on the numbers I can remember, if an election was held now, based on the polls that you've just seen, let's just go back to them. Those numbers point to Reform on 150 seats, Labour on 200, the Tories on 150, Lib Dems on 70, Greens on 5, going on 10, etc. Okay? If we use the general election No, if we use our local elections as the instigator to an acknowledgement that the polls are understating reform, and if once you correct for that, you end up with reform winning 200 seats in the House of Commons, going on to 250, and then you end up with the Conservatives winning 100 to 100 and something, and you can already add those numbers together. What does that give you? That gives you a Reform Conservative majority, and you end up with Labour falling, from 400 seats they got now to 150 or thereabouts. Lib Dems on 70 something, Greens maybe on a dozen, if that. Other parties, independent candidates pulling in double what they got now. Jess Phillips, Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting, all in trouble if these polls, if these local elections are to be believed. Interesting stuff indeed. Let's take some questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. Corbs for Life says there will be a snap general election next year. Evidence, if anything, that you sometimes don't know what you're talking about. What else we got here? Question you missed earlier. Where do we see Tories still holding strong? Where is their base at the moment? Wiltshire. Incredibly affluent areas that voted Leave. Think of that. Incredibly affluent areas that voted Leave. But Shropshire voted Leave. Interesting. Maybe that's... okay. Where else are they doing quite well? Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't think there's any demographic unifier there yet. The appeal of Kemi Badenoch, for instance, is, it's flat. It's flat across age groups. There's no real strength amongst the old as it is amongst the young. There's no real strength amongst the young or the old. There's nothing. And I think it has to do in part because she's seen as a non-entity by the voters. I don't know. Question, why are some of the media saying that Reform have changed two-party politics for good? Could this not just be a one-off? It could be a one-off. It absolutely could be a one-off. But turnout is staying. It's not just, normal voters staying at home. It's turning out new people. Now, Reform could completely, fumble this, and those new people turning out saying, sod this, I'm not coming out again. Come on, it would be a real hit to Nigel Farage's appeal. But I don't think this is a one-off. I think this is just increased exhaustion with the status quo in whatever form it comes, and a backlash to it. And any party that advocates for the status quo, any party that is not seen to be implementing appealing change enough, is going to get absolutely panned at the polls. Do you think it would help or hurt the Tories to replace Badenoch at this point? I don't think anyone would notice if Kemi Badenoch was replaced tomorrow. I think it wouldn't hurt. It would not hurt the Tories. Adriana Spalinki says, ruling party can expect a backlash at first local elections. Yes, because no third party polling above 20% until Reform. Yes. Chloe says, Wiltshire is their strongest area. They will still probably won't be leading the council, which they've had a majority on for 25 years. It's all relative, isn't it? It's absolutely all relative. There was some other questions coming up top. The snooker is too exciting. Looked at Lancashire. Yep, we've looked at Lancashire. You can watch a replay of this on YouTube later. Yeah, perhaps a pack is exactly what Labour wants. I think it might be. I think Labour would prefer it if there was a pack. It would nullify the appeal of Reform slightly. IDK asks, what do you think of the BBC's PNS? I don't know. Do you think that it is a good, accurate measure, or just the best that is available for local elections to show how the country would have voted as a whole? I always have issues with the PNS. PNS, for those who don't know, is projected national share. So what we just had, just gone, are elections not in every corner of the country, have we? I call it Shire England. It's part of England. Only 11 million people out of a possible, 50-something, 60-something, had the right to vote on Thursday, the 1st of May. That's not, it's a decent portion, but it's not a majority. It's not a quarter. It's nothing. It's not much. And what a PNS does, projected national share, projects the national share, if the whole of the country would have voted. Now, the way they do that is they take a select sample of wards, divisions that came in, and then model them relative to how other seats normally do. So if Thurrock, for instance, was included in these elections, had an election, but Basildon didn't, they would find, okay, so Thurrock normally is more Labour by 3 points, so we put that on there and we work it off that. Okay, they build it off that, and it's an interesting model. It's an interesting projection, but I have my doubts about it. I've always had my doubts about it because they're sampling similar to Lord Ashcroft's polling of Runcorn, similar to perhaps YouGov and others' polling of the west of England. Suggests to me sampling is key. Where do you get your sample from? Which seats do you choose? And it can change the whole equation. In the past, when the BBC and others tried to do the PNS for 2013, just when UKIP were getting off, they did it badly. And I think some of them who were involved in it have told me they hold their hands up about that, because I've complained about it publicly many times. But this year's 30% reform, look, I have a model. I'm comparing what happened here to my model. Reform being on 30% doesn't sound half wrong. It doesn't sound half wrong. And I'll be talking more about that in my next piece for the New Statesman. Assuming the pitch gets accepted. Just looking at numbers, Tory losses mirror reform gains. What are the main drivers of this change? Is it really the winter fuel allowance? I would say it has a significant role to play in driving people away from Labour. Now, there's two things. We can't conflate them. There are people leaving Labour and going wherever. Doesn't matter if it's reform, doesn't matter if it's non-voting, whatever. That's one body of voters. And then there's another body of voters, which is those who are coming to reform. They are not the same. They're not always the same. Some of them are similar. You do have some Labour voters going reform. If you got 100 Labour voters in the room right now, 100 people who backed Keir Starmer for Prime Minister in 2024, and you'd ask them where they are now, about 40 of them would say, I'm not voting or I'm staying home. Maybe 50. Around about 10 of them say they're going Tory, although I'm almost tempted to say that's overstating them. There's always a theory that in polling we overstate the overly logged on. We overstate frankly, the middle class and affluent. And you have about 5 to 10 going reform. You have about 5 to 10, maybe even 15 going green. But just stop there. 5 to 10 going reform. Okay? That didn't give us the win in Runcorn and Helsby. What gave us the win in Runcorn and Helsby was non-voters coming out. What gave us the win in Runcorn and Helsby was Tory voters going reform. What gave us the win in Runcorn and Helsby was a tiny portion of Greens going to reform. It did happen. We know it happens. The appeal of the Greens and the reforms, as I've said many times before, can be similar to some voters. Reform's primary gain in support comes from those that did not vote on the 4th of July last year. Maybe historically they're Tory. Okay? Bear that in mind. Maybe they were Tory in 2019, non-voting in 24, and they're now coming Reform's way. Okay? So, what is driving non-voters out to come for Reform? Multitude of issues. Immigration does play a part to play. It does have a part to play, but it's not the overwhelming number. I would say it's like, it explains close to half of the Reform rise. But the other half is more down to other parties' voters staying home. So winter fuel, PIP. I reiterate as well, announcing the changes to PIP, all the while a part of Runcorn had one of the highest concentrations of PIP claimants in the whole of England and Wales, doesn't ring right as a decent campaign strategy, does it? Really interesting stuff. So, back to some more questions. What are the main drivers? I've already asked that. With power comes responsibility. Now we can see how Reform does. UKIP were terrible when they were in charge of local councils. Well, one Reform councillor has already been suspended. And then she said, Donna Rachel Edmonds, former UKIP councillor in Lewis, I think I remember rightly. She said, you can't suspend me, I resign. Interesting. Why do you think Labour have agreed to publish migrant data in the form of the league table? What benefit do you think Labour see in it? Not a clue. I don't know. I think it's trying to appeal to a similar rhetoric. Once you talk about immigrants in nationalities. What on earth? What ridiculousness is that? based on the question you've asked me. I haven't read fully on that. Can we expect to see Labour losses in Tameside? Now, Longdendale went from Labour to Reform in the April by-election, and Andrew Gwynn having the whip removed by Labour in Gorton Reddish. Yes. So next year I think is going to be extremely interesting because we have elections in Scotland, elections in Wales, we have elections in urban England, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, London. The London boroughs are all going to the polls, and other small towns like Rugby, Redditch, maybe Gloucester, parts like that. They're going to be having elections, and how Reform does their, I don't know. They're going to do very, very well indeed. The appeal of Reform in these shire, county council, English shire elections, erred more towards the built-up red brick parts of the world, and for places like, the gap between Liverpool and Manchester, Wigan, Bolton, what else is there? West Lancs, Skelmersdale, which Reform won by a canter. Yeah, it just bears a repeat of that. In the Senate, because of Labour's desire to pursue proportional representation, you're going to have, Reform pulling in 20% of the seats in the Senate, maybe going on 25, maybe even 30. Look, if the national polls put Reform on 25, and if these local elections suggest the polls are actually putting Reform on 30, and given we know that Wales is just that slightly more Reform friendly than the national average, then Reform might be pulling in 30% plus in the Senate election to come. Really interesting stuff, and something for Scotland as well. Back in the day of UKIP, Scotland and a great many activists in Scotland prided themselves on being UKIP free, even though they had an MEP, or very unfriendly to UKIP, and that was the case. UKIP often performed very poorly in by-elections, often losing their deposit even when they were polling 10-15% across the UK. Those days are gone. They're pulling in 20% in council by-elections, 25% in some. They're polling, 15% in Scotland. Yeah, they're doing 10 points worse, 10, maybe more, worse than England and Wales, but goodness me, 10 to 20% for Reform in Scotland seems to be the likely outcome in 12 months' time. That's going to be a lot of members of the Scottish Parliament bearing the Reform banner. Same in the Senate. Really interesting stuff. Do you think Reform performing this well will cause the left to coalesce around the SNP in Scotland next year? Feels like Reform results are an easy campaign measure for them. It could, yes. This is the thing. What Farage does is he turns people on and he turns people off. He is more of a Marmite figure than the Reform brand. Okay? And I would suggest, yes, is the short answer. Is that the SNP could use that to say, these guys are indulging Reform. We will never vote for us. But I'd also put it to you that there are a lot of Reform messages that a great many voters sympathise with. And so to be everything Reform is not might create an artificial ceiling for you that might just be that little bit lower than you expected. Charles Brewer asks, my question about migrant hotels / net zero was about a change in the nature of political conflict in certain local authorities and direct. That's not a question. I can't understand that. Tangerine asks, if the supplementary vote was still in place for the mayoralties, do you think it would have changed any of the results? Part of me feels Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire would have been the same, but not the others. Let me think. Yes, I agree with you, frankly. The supplementary vote is the best thing going for progressive parties. Look, I think there's a decent portion, I think a majority of Lib Dem and Green voters would second preference Labour in a Lab v Con fight, in a Lab v Reform fight. But we're not seeing that in these mayoralties because it's first past the post, because people are rightly pissed off with the Labour government and are so going elsewhere. So, yes. I think in Lincolnshire, Andrea Jenkins' own lead over the other parties was so strong. It's a guaranteed win for her. And that was an overperformance. That was a stunning effort on the part of Reforms there. When the two main parties go insane, what choice is there? Excellent question. Can't answer that. Question: around the time of the next election, do you think the Trump effect will impact reform in the same way it did in Canada and Australia? Only if Trump exists in the mind of the voters in a way it did in Canada, which is on the border with the US, and Australia, which was reeling from the announcement of tariffs, which the way the Australian media covered it really did some harm to Australian Labour Party's effort to curb the cost of living. If you can make Trump a question, if you can make Trump an issue, then yes, it might do something. And for a tiny portion after Trump's inauguration in the UK, what happened? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. What happened? You did actually see a slight bump, surprising though it may be, a slight bump for Keir Starmer, but it lasted 5 minutes. Other parts of the world did see greater improvements for their incumbents. Emmanuel Macron did he's very unpopular in France. Probably would lose if an election was held today to the far right. Might even lose to the more radical left. But in terms of his favourables, they were already rock bottom. They did see a slight bump the minute Trump came in. All right? People like to rally against something, even if the incumbent is not the most popular. Charles Brewer tries again with a question. Do you think we are going to see a conflict between Westminster and Reform councils on national issues? Yes. As a councillor myself, I have issues with housing associations. I have issues with letting agents, landlords. I have issues with a whole host of policies that I use to deal with homelessness, housing, and all the rest of it. And look, I'm a Labour councillor, and there are plenty of things that when I, complain about this and that and the other, the often answer is, sorry, we can't do anything. It's national legislation, and that's very frustrating. And I'd say reform is going to face that on a much grander scale. There will be some things they may try to do that could be rendered illegal by a court or two. What will it do? It depends. Here's the thing, right? Reform has its passion projects, and I would always just say, what is the appeal? What is the appeal of... let me see if I can turn the light on while I'm here. What is the appeal of reform? Oh no, that light doesn't work. The appeal of reform is primarily immigration, it's primarily being anti-Labour, it's primarily being about identity politics, and the cost of living is driving people to them. Okay? And where am I going with this? Other issues such as woke, trans rights, net zero, even though they are trying to meld it to the cost of living, I have to say, it's not the most important issue to the voters. The voters, it's primarily cost of living, immigration, identity. Okay? Everything else is stir fry. Not stir fry. What is it? It's it's word salad. It's salad dressing. So with that in mind, if a reform council gets in trouble with the government on an issue other than the main issues of the day, if it's basically about the word salad, their salad dressing, that reformers like to obsess over, that anyone on the right, in the Daily Mail comment section like to obsess over, they're not going to look good in front of their voters. Ruben van der Ree. What is the future of the Tory party? Troubling. They are not going to go far. What is their base anymore? Seems like the Lib Dems and Reform are eating from the respective flanks. Love the coverage here from the Netherlands. Thank you very much. Or the Low Countries, as more affluent Asian people would say. Oh, the Low Countries. But anyway, what is the future for the Tory party? Hard to say. It is tough because they need to eke out a unique sell, and they don't have it anymore. They're half Reform, they're half Lib Dem. Well, if you want a bit of reform, you'll go full fat. If you want a bit of Lib Dem, you'll go full fat. You don't go for the semi-skimmed mixed variant, do you? The Tories right now are it's a horrible. I don't know where I'm going with this. The Tories are like a combination of a breakfast drink, milk and juice. What kind of appeal is that? That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. And that pretty much summarises it. They're trying to be the orange juice of the Lib Dems and the milk of reform. combined together. What are you getting out of that? That's nothing. That's nothing. I'm enjoying this analogy. I'm going to keep using that. Rob Wales asks, do you think some of the newly elected reform councils will split and set up independent groups? Without a doubt. It happens. It's already happened to Labour. And how well did they do? Not well, those independent councillors. Disaster area, how much time did you have to work on the model for this election? Seems to be one of the best out there. For Britain Predicts, I built it along with some colleagues, some really good colleagues, data journalist colleagues, Michael Goodyear, Josh Raymond, who is a visual designer, long ago, back in 2021. Great colleagues. They since left the New Statesman to go to pastures new. I think Michael, where is he? Is he still at The Guardian or did he leave? Not sure. And Josh is all over the world right now. Maybe I shouldn't really be saying that. Anyway, yeah. Final question from Dragonborn, who I hope is enjoying the Oblivion remastered game. Is identity politics dead in the UK? Absolutely not. It's alive and well. It's the most, identity politics is here to stay. Actually, identity politics never went away. It was just owned by other parties once upon a time. Once upon a time, New Labour knew how to own a British identity, an English identity, and then lost it because, I don't know, it became too technocratic, too bureaucratic, too logged on to Westminster, too logged off to insert part of Northern England that begins with L. Lancashire. Too logged off to Lancashire, too logged on to London. Is identity politics dead? It's not. Was it prevalent in politics in recent years because we had less to worry about? No. Identity politics will play a greater role. Identity politics is the wrong one. Immigration, as an issue, will play a greater role in voters' minds when they don't have their wallets to worry about. The cost of living was what got Labour elected. If there wasn't a cost of living crisis to worry about, the Tories could have been on course for a fifth-term win, because voters are more socially conservative than the Labour Party, I think, is willing to appreciate. If you had an election on immigration alone, Labour, they wouldn't have won it. But because the Tories did such a horrible job on immigration, seen by the voters, and because net migration was so high, voters could not trust the incumbents with it, Labour was actually neck and neck, if not eking out a 1, 2, 3 point advantage over the Tories on the issue. So if there was a general election held on immigration alone in 2024, it would have been a different result. But Labour would have probably still won it. Okay, so is identity politics dead? I would say no. The minute the cost of living dies is the minute other issues rear their heads in a way no one expects. What else? I don't know how else to answer that, sorry. Tangerine, speaking of councillors not expected to be elected, a pair of reform councillors got elected on Thursday on my local council, Isle of Wight, that no one seems to have seen or met. Well, you're going to see or meet them now, aren't you? Rob Wales asked, do you think that Lib Dems could replace the Tories as the main opposition party? Ooh. It's tough, isn't it? Because the ceiling of Lib Dem, where are the Lib Dems going to target? I would say there's about 20 to 30 more seats that the Lib Dems could gun for to take off the Tories. So that gets them almost to 100. Is that going to make them the main opposition? No. The Lib Dems need to be something other than just Blue England. Blue England? What was it called? What was that horrible term called? Blue Wall England. They need to be something other than Blue Wall England. They need to eat into Labour's middle class, affluent, liberal areas. They need to be, they could be something else. But who they become, I think, would reopen that old debate in the Lib Dem between what was it called? Social Liberal Forum and Orange Bookers. Isn't that dead and buried now as a debate in the Liberal Party, in the Lib Dems? If the Lib Dems fancy being the official opposition, they will need to have that debate on which direction they wish to go. Anyway, I think that covers it. And right now, you could probably see it's getting dark. And I should have turned the light on, but never mind. Anyway, look, listen. If you want to get the map, of the local election results, go to newstatesman.com. Newstatesman.com, and you scroll down to, let's refresh this page. Go to newstatesman.com, scroll down, and you'll find it's the second most read item on the website today. English local election results. You can find that map there, and you can have a look around, and you can see all of this. Okay? If you want to read why Labour lost Runcorn, go to britainelects.com. Read that piece, give it some thoughts. I want your views on this. My view often is it comes down to the fact some parts of that seat were just ignored for years, and the voters wanted to lash out appreciably. The view is it permanent or is it short term? We don't know yet. But what the local elections showed, what the local elections happened here, and let's just remind ourselves of those changes. Look how dramatic it is. It shows this, that 25% for reform in the opinion polls, that is not enough. That is understating the reform share. So, that concludes our post-match analysis for this year's 2025 May the 1st local elections. The Runcorn and Helsby forecast did very well. I said reform, I said Labour would hold on by a few hundred votes or less. Turns out reform gained it by 6 votes. I'd call that a win. The local election forecast did absolutely disastrously, and I'm going to be the first to admit that. Reform went over and above what the polls implied. The polls implied they'll get 300 and something. They ended up with 600 and something. Labour rendered absolutely irrelevant in this contest. The government of the day, absolutely irrelevant. The Tories, truly, they have an identity crisis. I don't know if a leader change will change that. They'll be desperate. They'll want to out Farage, but again, you know, they are a mix of orange juice and semi-skimmed milk. You're not going anywhere like that, are you? The Lib Dems continue to be resplendent in Blue Wall England in all of the seats they made parliamentarians of in 2024. And the Greens are showing sustained progress. They're not booming. They're not booming in a way Reform has. They would naturally say, but the media aren't covering it enough. Well, maybe, but maybe it might have something to do with you. Independent candidates are scoring wins in Muslim-heavy parts of England. Gaza independents, as they're being colloquially called. Some of them have some very conservative views, and some of them are just very pro-Palestinian. It would be wrong to taint them all. But Labour's relationship, Britain's relationship with its minority voters is changing. They are deciding to vote more independently of this party or that. Hindu voters in Leicester and Harrow, Muslim voters in the north of England of West Yorkshire and Lancashire and Greater Manchester. Things are changing. And the polls, to remind you, the most popular party in the country is apparently on 25% of the vote. That is not normal. That is not normal. So welcome to this age of chaos. Welcome to this age of chaos, and I'm delighted to be with you for it. My name has been Ben Walker. Thank you for watching this stream, and I will see you another time, whenever that is. All the best.